Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted and honored to have my friend back, Yasuhiko Kimura. And today we're going to be talking about paths to self-realization. Welcome, Yasuhiko.
Thank you.
So Yasuhiko, what is self-realization?
Okay, this is a subject that that has been spoken about for centuries, and if we were to define Western philosophy as the love of wisdom, which transforms itself to wisdom of love, Eastern tradition, we can say that it is philosophy is the path of self-realization. And primarily, I spoke from the Eastern perspective, and later on we can talk about this subject from Western perspective. But in the Eastern tradition, we have three kinds of self-realization. Sometimes these three kinds of self-realizations are only indicated. And the very few actually masters have articulated those three. And today, in light of 21st century knowledge we have, I would like to articulate those three kinds, the three stages of self-realization. In the process, the concept of self-realization will be defined, at least distinguished. So three kinds of self-realization, therefore there are three kinds of selves, you can say. The first kind and first stage is the realization of the unique self that you are, as distinct from false self. Usually nowadays people call this ego, and also as differentiated in its design from all the other selves. So let me use computer biosemiotic scientific analogy. So each one of us constitute like three layers of semiotic systems. The basic layer is biochemical. Next layer is bioelectric. And third layer is neuropsychological. And we are born with this hardware and software operating system, each uniquely. And in the process of acculturation, enculturation, acculturation, and conditioning, society superimposes upon our original unique operating system, collective, ready-made system. So in the case of computers, Apple has one model and then new model. When you buy a model, there are many of the same models. In the case of humans, each person is unique. There's slightly different models, all of us. And instead of us organically growing with this hardware and operating system software, we grow old with the superimposed operating system. We call ourselves being conditioned by society. So what happens is that the sense of self that we already we have developed into something that is not organic. So what we think who we are culturally conditioned.
Wow.
And socially programmed using the operating system that has been superimposed upon ourselves. And so using this kind of language, the first kind of self-realization is what Lao Tzu calls an unlearning.
Mm-hmm.
Michelangelo has a famous quote, beauty is the purgation of the superfluous.
Mm-hmm.
So the first self-realization is the purgation of the superfluous, the mimetically acquired construct that is ourselves inside this visible universe. So we become who we authentically are, each one of us. So we are actually shedding the inauthentic self, which is culturally conditioned, and find unique self that each one of us is. So unique comes from uniqueness, which means oneness. So we achieve oneness in the sense of unique, being a uniqueness.
Wow.
And today, we have become so complex. This process of the first self-realization has become more difficult than in the past. So once we purgate, go through the purgation of the superfluous, inauthentic, conditioned, programmed, mimetically acquired self, and begin to unfold our authentic self, we discover and realize our unique self, which has never been in existence in the whole history of humanity, and in fact, in the whole history of the universe. It will never be repeated again. Mm-hmm. And that is the initial foundational self-realization, which we can say, I am Atman.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Let me pause a little bit on this and kind of put it in my own words. Like immediately after we are born, the society around us is basically putting all of this stuff in us, which is actually not us. It is being fed into us. And we're actually acquiring this very early in life, where we do not have the conceptual ability to make choices. We are very limited, and we are taking it all in a imitative way. We're basically imitating everybody around us, and we take that in. And the society, as the modern societies progress, the amount of this stuff that gets put in us is humongous. And these are not inert things that kind of sit there. These are all habits, ways of functioning, emotions, so that they're active things which are actually completely camouflaging what you actually are. And the first step is negation. It is to subtract. So it's like, I like to call it addition by subtracting. So you have to remove all of that stuff. Until you remove all of that stuff, you do not even have the ability to do anything from that.
Yes. So it is not just we are programmed. The fundamental operating system into which social programs are being programmed into, programmed into itself is superimposed. And what happens is, as I was saying, there's 3 layers to our semiotic system. And when this particular program is fundamentally the neuropsychological operating system, which came from outside. So it is already not in integrity with the rest of the system. Mm-hmm. So your consciousness, you as a whole being, you as a whole consciousness, there's already out of integrity element, disharmonious, and fragmentation takes place right there. And there's an innate suffering in being fragmented. Yes. And I use this metaphor sometimes. In Japan, we have something called bonsai. Mm-hmm. And so there's a tree, and they cut, and then become a tiny, very contorted version of natural tree. And then they actually appreciate the contortion as beauty. And our society is like that, and our educational system is like that. When we are born as a natural tree, like growing in Amazon rainforest, no, they will put in your pot and begin to cut according to the value system, the sense of beauty that the particular culture has.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give you one more example, which is actually very scary. But it actually, in some ways, it seems to be very macabre. Mm-hmm. But I think what society does to our souls is not actually that much better. There used to be a group of people in France called comprachicos. Mm-hmm. What they did was that they took children very young, and they put them in all kinds of restrictive things so that they would become these distorted creatures. Yes. And to be used in circus.
Yes.
And that is exactly what is being done.
Yes.
At a psychological level, so people can't see it actually as clearly.
Yes. So there are dramatic examples and analogies, but so how can we achieve this initial stage of self-realization, which is the realization of the unique self? We are not only programmed, but also the operating system that we use has been superimposed upon us. And so ancient and contemporary spiritual practices is a path initially for this purpose. And many people today, they go to psychologists and psychotherapists. Unfortunately, therapists themselves are actually conditioned, programmed, not aware of the programming themselves. It's very rare to find a psychologist. I have few friends who are actually awake. And so if you are going to see a psychologist, you want to make sure that they are awake, psychologists. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I have this model called self continuum, self with capital S and slash self with small s, continuum. So when we begin to meditate, there's an observer and observed. And oftentimes this observed is basically a projected self, which we call self. So when you see yourself as a self continuum, and self with small s is being observed, you begin to kind of make a distinction between the larger self and smaller self. And smaller self is not just one personality, it is a society of personalities and constellation of floating identities. There are multiple personality, small self, you begin to observe. These are conditioned selves. It is not a self, it is selves. And this observer is always one. So when you begin to meditate, it is good to kind of move into this with this notion of self continuum, and the self with a large capital S, you, is observing small s's in many different situations. You can see this small s takes on different personalities, depending on the situations and depending on whom he or she is talking or relating to. And this self is small self is largely conditioned and programmed. And this pure observer that is observing is not conditioned. That is organically part of this being, this consciousness that came into existence. That's number one. And number two, second, so when we begin to make this distinction, the small sounds, and you become an observer, a second step that you take is you realize that, these sounds use your mind and ask questions and do many different mental activities inside a particular paradigm. And what they do is based on fundamental assumptions or beliefs that they have acquired. The fundamental difference between your organic operating system, mental operating system, and superimposed operating system is this. Superimposed operating system works on the basis of believing. There's already set of beliefs embedded, and it functions on the basis of believing. And your organic operating system asks questions and reach an answer through its own thinking. It may use, of course, it uses language, which is a program, but it asks questions different from the kind of questions that superimposed operating system asks. And the kind of questions that original operating system asks, the superimposed operating system with all kinds of programming, languages, knowledge cannot answer. Zen koan is designed for this purpose. You cannot answer with the existing operating system that has been superimposed upon your mind, your neuropsychological semiotic system. And when you go back, way back into your childhood, before 5 years old, you used to ask all kinds of questions. And those questions were suppressed by society. And society, the educational system, monopolizes the kind of question they ask you. And then they monopolize the way to solve it. Mm-hmm. And then they monopolize the answer. Mm-hmm. And those people who are more monopolized are considered to be smart. Mm-hmm. Wow. So the second stage is you begin to see the thought those small selves have, and then really go back to the original innocence and begin to ask questions. And this is so important. When people come to my courses, originally I ask them questions because they don't know how to ask those questions. But the more they progress, they begin to ask questions on their own. And I don't need to give them answers. They're smart people. They answer for themselves. And some questions you'll never answer. That's the fun questions that you can ask. But anyway, this kind of questions only come into existence when we begin to free ourselves from the original conditioning and begin to purgate, begin the process of purgation of the superfluous or superimposed, and begin to think for the first time. That's what Martin Heidegger discovered in the early 20th century. He says, in this most thought-provoking time, what is the most thought-provoking is that we are not thinking. And I think his philosophy is fundamentally designed or intended to really provoke thinking for people. He is a philosopher who asks questions and asked questions all his life. And he invites people to ask the same question together. And so he was what he called thinking is meditative thinking. Meditative thinking, which is different from conceptual constructive thinking. So in this self continuum mode, you begin to see the thought that small selves have and begin to think, ask questions and think. And to me, that is what Krishnamurti called awakening of intelligence. Intelligence is the aptitude for asking questions. And until you begin to ask your original questions, your intelligence is asleep. It is different kind of intelligence from an IQ test or the school exam test. Once we begin to ask your original questions and begin to really think for the first time, then you can actually use the programs that have been programmed into the superimposed operating system in your own way. They are compatible. Some programs you just discard completely, but some program you can use and you can have a new program. You learn new language, new vocabulary. Wonderful. So this is in 21st century, this is a big deal. When people talk about enlightenment or self-realization, it is usually the second one. But you see, today, we must go through this process thoroughly before we can actually achieve the second stage, where self-realization, enlightenment.
Wonderful. I have a question about the self continuum.
Yes.
So I'm going to summarize my understanding of it.
Yes.
And then last part is I wanted to ask you why do you call it continuum? So what you're saying is that the small self is identities that we think what we are. It's like different me's. It's like a constellation of me's, which you have essentially borrowed from other people and societies around, or made up or something. So you have these.
It was really borrowed in the sense it was mimicked.
Mimicked, yes, yes. And so you have that constellation. People who are not really aware are just operating based on those. So there isn't that I, which is kind of the core of your being's ability to pay attention, to be aware. So in that sense, this small self is not self-aware of itself. It is just reacting using whatever programming that they have. The bigger self is like the watcher. It's like the I, which is able to see it as a separate, actually be able to see all these identities operating as separate separate things and separate itself from it. So kind of like be above it so that you can see it. So that's how I understand it. So it's, and that's really like the core.
Yes.
The bigger self is the core of your being, your ability of paying attention, your ability of being self-aware.
Now, two things. So the self continuum, the self is a conceptual framework that we can use. And it has produced good results. And it is a good framework, but we don't need to being stuck with this particular framework. But the reason it is a continuum is because our consciousness is not digital. It is analog. And it is one consciousness. And this is what Kitaro Nishida, the Japanese philosopher, calls self-identity of absolute contradictions. So it is a self and self are distinct, but not discontinuous. So they are different, distinct. At the same time, it is the same, which will become more clear when we go into the second stage of enlightenment, self-realization.
Let us go to the second.
Yeah. So if we are clear about the first stage, the first kind, the realization of the unique self, which is I am Atman, oneness as uniqueness, the unique, and it is the what Lao Tzu calls the unlearning, the great unlearning. In today's language, it is a deprogramming, and debunking of the operating system, and restoration of the original operating system, and reusing or programs in a new operating system. Then in the human system, it becomes organically whole with the biochemical and bioelectrical systems as well. So inherent suffering that exists when you are fragmented and conditioned disappear. You become whole, one being as you. And that's the first stage. The second stage is, so this is the I am Atman, or Nisargadatta Maharaj's I am. When you are centered in this and you begin to evolve in this, the self continuum, the self that has been aware of the small self also become aware of the larger whole, of which it is a part. So it begins to see oneness different from the kind of oneness that it has achieved being a unique self. It is a wholeness, oneness of the all. It is the infinite. The first unique self is finite. It comes into existence when you are born. It disappears when you die in the human sense of life. Life that is biterminal. Life that is present in the temporal. But then in the second realization, you realize the universal self, the self of the whole, the self of the one, the self of the infinite. And so you can say this is the realization, I am Nirvana. And when you are, I am Nirvana, the self that is realized is also no self. The self of the whole, the self of one, self of the infinite is no self. Again, Kitaro Nishida's self-identity of absolute contradictions. It is Atman as Anatma. I am Nirvana. So it is the finite merging into the infinite. It is the evolutionary transformation. It is the part, the consciousness of the part evolved to merge into the whole, and it is transformed in the process. So this is primarily what self-realization means in ancient traditions. When any tradition, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, this is the enlightenment that they talk about. But now, so in terms of development, it is the second stage. And actually, in terms of time, sometimes the first stage, the second stage can take place before the first stage, especially today, which include this person who is talking. I had the experience of the second enlightenment when I was 16, way too early.
Let me, can I go ahead and put,
yes.
I want to phrase the second level in my own words.
Yeah.
And I want to hear whether I'm getting what you're saying.
Yes.
So I can think of it in two traditions. One is the Indian tradition. Second is we've been studying Tao Te Ching, and many of us are familiar with that. So I want to put it in both those terms. So in Indian tradition, it's the Brahman, which is nature, which is everything, the universe and God, if you will. And Atman is the core of you. And the basic principle is Tat Tvam Asi, you are that. So there is an equation between you and the universe, you and nature.
So instead of I said I am that, I said I am Nirvana.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So that's one tradition that I see. The second tradition that I see is what we are studying in Tao Te Ching. That's where you're saying there is Tao, and a sage is focused on the Tao and is acting according to the Tao, so that the Tao expresses it within himself. So he becomes one with the Tao. So that experience of nature and you being one. That's how I understand it.
Yes. So it is, self-identity of Atman with Brahman.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Wonderful.
So that's the second stage, and we will go back to the second stage because it is the what we normally call self realization. But I just want to make sure that two things. This I, this self, is also no self, and people misunderstand Buddhist notion of anatman, no self, and this is no self. That is the self, and it is important. That's where the Hindu tradition and the Buddhist tradition actually agree. It is not a denial of Hindu tradition. It is a denial of people's misunderstanding of self. But it does not mean that Atman does not exist. Okay. Secondly, as I said, I was just talking about myself. Today, especially, people, because the second realization is available, because the self is present and the whole is present, and sometimes people have that experience. But when the small self has not been organized, so to speak, in such a way that the self-self continuum become an authentic self-self continuum, unique self, and conscious self. It can cause many problems. And I have seen this in my own life, and amongst people who are into spiritual awakening, and amongst so-called spiritual teachers. One of the thing that you can have, the misunderstanding you can have. Of course, when your ego is still false self is alive, it can take over. So you may meet some very egotistical spiritual teacher. You see, their small self continuum hasn't achieved this uniqueness. So still their false self is quite alive and very clever. And once you have that experience, that ego can actually own that experience and become a teacher, writer, whatever. And because you have that experience, you have a kind of knowledge that most people don't have. So you can gain power. It's very dangerous for people who are egotistical to achieve the second level realization, and it happens. And number two, sometimes this oneness with the whole can be misunderstood or misinterpreted or misexperienced as the so-called ascended masters, galactic federations. Today, people talk about those, and I'm not denying those, I'm not criticizing those. Those are names that people have given. There is a layer of consciousness which Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, anima mundi, negatively interpreted or understood. There's a layer of consciousness that exists in this universe in a higher vibrational state that can pose itself as the oneness of the whole. And it can actually start to send messages and pose as a master, giving message to the medium, and start to manipulate humans from the above. I'm not saying all the ascended masters, the galactic federations are all bad people, but there are so many of those that are present. In Buddhism, in Japanese Buddhism, it calls Makyo, devil's realm. And when you are not grounded in the first enlightenment, and if you are still living in the form of illusion and delusion, that initial experience can immediately transform into this some form of mediumship, where negative aspect of collective unconsciousness take over that person and do harm, not only to that person, but to other human beings who follow that person. And I see this today, especially on the internet. You will see them on YouTube. It is extremely dangerous. And I don't want to go too much into the occult here, but there's a danger for people who achieve this second stage enlightenment without deeply rooted in the first enlightenment to go into a devilish direction or unbeneficial to humanity direction, and it can become a devolutionary force, not an evolutionary force. And number three, another problem with this time reversal is that a person who had that experience can have lots of physical problems. And that happens because the body is not designed, this biochemical and bioelectrical and actually neurological system are not ready for that kind of vibration, and it can cause all kinds of problems. Krishnamurti had a headache for a long time. That is one of the symptoms. I have had headache, acute headache, 24 hours a day. So once those people who have had that experience can go mad. Meher Baba from India, his mission in life was to bring those enlightened mad people, insanely enlightened people, back to sanity by actually grounding them into the first stage of enlightenment. So in my teaching, in most cases, I only focus on the first enlightenment. And when people are ready, we go into the second. And most traditions, except for the esoteric dimensions, they never talk about third dimension, third stage. And the third stage of self-realization is not evolution. So you have evolved from the finite to infinite. You have merged into the whole. Movement is an evolutionary movement. So now you begin to live inside the trans-finite realm with the finite body. You have merged, and your residence moved from the finite dimension to infinite dimension, a trans-finite dimension. When this happens, involution from the infinite to finite, finite takes place. And then you begin to recognize that some change actually takes place in your neuro, psychological, and bioelectrical, and even biochemical dimension of your being. So in a way, you begin to have different kind of body. It takes sometimes long time, but it happens. And some people, some of those highly super enlightened people have a different kind of physical vibrations from the people, the rest of us. In the second stage, it doesn't happen. You merged. You are able to somehow contain the energy and the frequency. The third is actually the container begin to transform itself. And this is the third stage. And in Buddhism, second stage is called Nirvana. And third stage is called Paranirvana or Mahaparinirvana. In esoteric Christianity, that is the real meaning of resurrection. Christ was an enlightened being in the second stage of enlightenment. And he became transformed and resurrected as the embodiment of trans-finite dimension. It is not meeting with God. It's God actually infusing the being that has a physical form. That's the resurrection of Christ from an esoteric perspective. And contemporary spiritual teacher, the one who spoke about it so beautifully, is Sri Aurobindo.
Mm-hmm.
And also American spiritual philosopher Franklin Melville Wolf spoke about it. In my view, he is the greatest American spiritual philosopher of the last 250 years of American history.
Wow.
His book, Experience and Philosophy, is an excellent book to read. Anyway, so there have been, people who have achieved the third stage and spoke about it. In ancient times, it was more indicated, and only you are in the esoteric circle, the masters and disciples had oral interactions. It has never been really written down, except in a few places. Or even if it is written down, it is misinterpreted by those who are uninitiated. Mm-hmm. So resurrection of Christ, what are you talking about? I mean, once you're dead, you're not going to be resurrected, or it is a complete myth. No, there is a meaning to this. Christ, when he enters the third stage of enlightenment, resurrect, he lives in a transfinite dimension, supramental dimension, and his mental dimension, physical dimension become transformed involutionally, and that's the third stage. So when we talk about self-realization, those are the three forms. And probably I spend 75% of my time being with people on the first stage, and 24% of the time in the second stage.
Wow.
In the third stage, I am totally committed myself to go through that process until I die.
Wow. Thank you, Yasuhiko. What I want to do is that there are some amazing people on this call, and they are all wanting to ask you many, many questions.
Yes.
So is it okay if we go to questions?
Yes, that's maybe the major reason why I enjoy being in this program, because you have amazing group of people.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. No, I'm very, very fortunate, and I'm very grateful.
Yes. But that's because of you.
Partly, but it is like what happens is that you find people like you, who are similar to you, who are trying to do the same thing. We're trying to understand the world, trying to understand ourselves, and you just collect a bunch of people and you have this conversation. So thank you. All right, folks. So it's time for Q&A. We've got 4 rules as always. Type exclamation mark in order to ask a question. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. At this point, we are asking only questions. So try to be very brief and ask a question, because we want to get to as many questions as possible. There are many questions in line. And number 4, feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. So first up is going to be Sean. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Elena, Michelle, Stefan, Louise, Sanket, and Nir. So let me see. Son Obikoya, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. Thank you, Yasuhiko. My question was just to get your insights on the concept of self in African spirituality, and that is indigenous faith of Africa. And I'm quite aware that honoring nature is essential to it, like the 5 elements, earth, wind, water, and just wanted to get your thoughts, what you know about African spirituality and what the concept of self is.
Sorry, I do not know virtually anything about it.
Okay, sounds very good.
And if you can suggest something I can study, I would love to do that.
Awesome. I'll drop a link in the chat for you to review and for other people to check out as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Next up is Elena. Elena, what is your question?
Okay, and let me just say thank you. This is just beyond what I've expected because of it. Just explains lots of things to me. For me, my question is, the books that Yasuhiko mentioned, is it true? And those who achieved the third stage of enlightenment, you said it's Franklin Merrill Wolf, and maybe I just didn't catch it correctly. If someone could type it, and Sri Ravinda, right? Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, if you would be so kind to type it. And then,
Yes. Go ahead.
And so when you go into third stage, what's the purpose of existing there? So third stage, yeah. So what do you, again, there is no purpose, we know, but still, like, what do you, those who went there, who were there, transcend into that dimension, such as Christ and such, what did they experience? And anything else that you could add to it? Thank you so much. Oh, and another question that I have perhaps to Shrikant, could you again go and highlight differences between Atman and Brahman? So thank you.
Go ahead, Yasuhiko.
When you look at the original word for to be in Sanskrit, it means to grow. And being has a vector, which we call becoming, but that becoming vector is an evolutionary vector. The universe, everything that exists in the universe, when we look at the vector of movement of the universe, it is in the direction of evolution, more complexities and more integrities and higher orders. Of course, within this movement, there is a entropic movement, and there's distractions, but this eternally regeneratively, the universe seems to be moving in more and more evolved state, which include human consciousness and each human being. So in Buddhism, we define evolution as the open-ended process of learning. So evolution has element of learning and exploration. And so when you become completely tuned in, and when you begin to be the vessel of the involutionary movement of the higher, you also see that that is an essential component of evolutionary movement. So it's a involution, evolution, involution, evolution. So although we will never achieve this in our lifetime, when you enter the third stage, you experience involution, which will eventually turn into evolution, new kind of human beings that come into existence. So those of us, and I assume most of us or all of us who are in conversation today, are tuned into this movement of the universe, which is syntropic, not entropic. It is evolutionary, not devolutionary in terms of preponderance. It is moving into a higher consciousness. Our consciousness is moving higher consciousness, and this third stage involutionary process is the precursor to the next stage of evolution, which we will not see in our lifetime.
Wonderful, thank you. And kind of quick answer on Atman and Brahman. Brahman is roughly, you can translate it as nature, reality, or God, basically everything that is. And Atman is, you can roughly translate it into soul, the core of your being. Mitchell has a fantastic question, which he's requested me to read out. He says, it seems impossible to achieve self-realization while remaining a part of society. For instance, the act of waking up, going to work, and following a chain of commands is a programmed behavior. So is it possible to become enlightened and remain an active member of the society, or must one leave society in totality to be enlightened?
Depending on where you live, but living in New York City, it will be extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. I left society when I was very young, spent 5 years in monastery. Even when I went to India to study at the university in Bombay, I spent 5 months in Himalaya mountains. So it is, possibilities, yes, but in a practical way, it is virtually impossible living in a society which is anti-enlightenment and anti-self-realization. It will be very difficult. So, few things we can do. So we can form a community. Sri Lanka have beautiful community. So you have a online community of those who are committed in self-realization. Number one. So you have the conversation going. Number two, you must find a way to be alone every day in solitude. And you don't necessarily need to do meditation, which would be nice, but you see, being alone, away from people, away from your cell phone, computer, TV. And somehow, if you live in a New York City apartment, there is no nature probably, but you can create an environment for yourself. When I lived in New York, my wife and I listened to classical music all the time, because there is noise pollution. Noise pollution is even worse than air pollution because it will just get into your astral body and disturbs you. Your energies get disturbed. So listen to good music and just be alone. Number three, find a way to go into nature. Our friend, Luis Claudio from Brazil, he is so smart. He and his family found a way to live inside the Brazilian rainforest. So they live in nature. And, that's a dream for many of us. But, you want to find a way, once a week, you go somewhere. I think if there were no Central Park in Manhattan, the New York City would be complete insane asylum. It already is, but more.
All right.
Magnitude higher. People don't realize how much. Yes, because I tell you that your internal organic operating system is of nature, not of society or culture. So when you go into nature, immediately your original operating system begins to become alive. So it is essential. And also you want to choose books to read or movies to watch. It is very, very important not only be quiet and alone, also it is good to laugh. Somebody has live, laugh, and love. when you are laughing, have you ever seen the face of Stalin or Hitler? They were laughing. Even those undesirable humans, when they are laughing, there is an element of innocence in their face, their laughter. Laughter is so essential.
Wonderful.
So you want to orient yourself in such a way that you have your own space and develop it and create a community and be with nature and read and listen to something of a higher vibration. And yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Yasuhiko. Next up is going to be Stefan, Louis, and Sanket. Folks, if you have questions, go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat. Next up is Stefan. Stefan, go ahead.
Hi. So could you quickly go over the 3 levels again? And you were mentioning something about how if you go and skip levels, then this could be detrimental. So I was wondering, how can you best assure that you would go from levels 1, 2, and 3 in chronological order?
Okay. Stage 3 will not come until stage 1 and 2 are complete. So in terms of order, 3 you don't even need to worry. It is the 1 and 2. And second stage, you cannot plan. You can prepare, but you cannot plan. It is a spontaneous occurrence. And the more you're prepared, the more substantial your experience would be. But you still have a set of experiences that also have the consciousness element, wisdom element. You come to know something that you would otherwise cannot know. And so you want to, from the very beginning, if we can prepare children, that's wonderful. But if you are no longer a child and seeking for this, I suggest your focus always be the stage 1, where you can continue to read and study materials written by or spoken by the people who achieve 2nd and 3rd stage enlightenment. You want to focus on the 1st stage, which actually you can do intentionally to a significant degree once you have this knowledge and distinctions. So when you meditate, you begin to differentiate small self with this observer. Then begin to really observe the self, his thinking, his behavior patterns, his reactions, emotional, just like in multiple personalities, each self has different personalities and they have different emotions and mood. It's very interesting. The more you observe, you become clear about this. You are not, as a small self, you are not one person. You are a society of persons. Some are more dominant than others. And just because you're a man doesn't mean all the personality you have a man. Some are women. So Krishnamurti's teaching is actually designed to really be able to be aware of the small self. Everything that he is teaching, as if he is repeating the same thing over and over again, but then he is inviting to a place of observation to be able to see those selves. But once you become able to see it, there are so many selves. And there are fundamental emotions that those selves have. They are all united in fear. So now that you have this distinction, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and there's basic differences. So knowing this is good, and you want to focus on the first. Then when second happens, by grace of the universe, God, and then you don't go into to the divine madness. It is called divine madness when you have the second stage enlightenment without having the grounding into the first stage. Some people really go mad. If you have studied Meher Baba from India, his life was devoted to healing those divinely mad people. And one of the things he did was he never wrote anything. So his teaching is 101, really 101. The people who actually took notes, when you compare the two notes, it's so different. You cannot really say, oh, which one is correct, because neither one is correct. He was very clever in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Yasuhiko. Next up is going to be Louis, Sanket, and Brian. Louis has problems with his internet, so he's asked me to read out his question. Yes. He asks, dear Yasuhiko, could you talk a little about why it is so important not to neglect self-realization, not only just for your own sake, but for the sake of the whole or society?
Simply because of this. Just imagine a society where majority of people know who they are, as opposed to being hypnotized. We will have a much better society. So in a collective sense, the more people are awake, the better the society and culture will be. There will be less destruction, less unnecessary conflict, and there will be more people who are happy. So in a collective sense, that's number one. But more fundamentally, self-realization is the purpose of our life. We are here to self-realize. That is a fundamental purpose. And it is each of our responsibility, because each one of us is unique really unique. The uniqueness never disappears. It is a foundation of our self-realization and enlightenment. And your self-realization, because you have this element of uniqueness, is unique. And it's only you who can realize this. And that is our purpose. Very few of us, even begin to fulfill this purpose. And so God creates billions upon billions of humans. Then each one of them on a journey back to God in a very unique way. And that is the purpose. So why? Because it is why we are here. And the more realized people are, the better the collective will be. The one more thing I just want to mention, I distinguish self-realization from self-actualization. Mm-hmm. And of course, the first stage self-realization will be extremely beneficial for the self-actualization. But self-actualization is more in the sense of you actualizing your potentials. So the uniqueness of the self is self-realization, which contains your talent. You have a set of unique talents. The self-actualization is you want to actualize your inborn talent and abilities as much as possible. And that is self-actualization. And usually self-realization goes together with actualization, but not necessarily.
So what you're saying is that self-realization is more fundamental.
Yeah, it is fundamental.
because it actually is about who you are and the core of yourself, and realizing that.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Sanket, Brian, and Jyoti. Sanket.
Thank you for invitation, and thank you for taking the question. I'm going to play a little devil here. Since
just be short, that's all. Just keep it short.
Very short question. Yeah, very short.
Sure, he is from India, so he can't help but playing devil's advocate. They love debate.
I will ask a very brief question. The question is related to this. First of all, the subject of the meetup, which is path to self-realization, and then multiple times you took the name of Krishnamurti, and his entire teaching is based on the truth is a pathless land. There is no path to self-realization. And also he also talks about there are no stages. And here, what I felt that you are making a fundamental mistake by giving people hope and ideas to pursue, which Krishnamurti completely denies. Because once people have those ideas, oh, there are 3 stages I have to complete, first, second, third, then I'll reach there. And you talk about that headache and all. And the moment people have small headache in their head, they start thinking, oh, I'm getting self-actualization. So all this knowledge, do you think this knowledge has any value to everyone who is listening here? Is it going to add any value to their journey, that as we say it?
Okay. So I'll talk about.
Let me just comment on one thing, Yasuhiko. Firstly, we always appreciate questions. Okay, we always appreciate questions. We always appreciate people who kind of think about things, and when they see something is not matching with their understanding, to speak up and ask the question. So thank you. Go ahead, Yasuhiko.
Yeah. Actually, very good question. We can take this question into many different directions, but Krishnamurti's truth is pathless path, which was uttered when he was 34, giving the first and last talk to his society. This is where the Kitaro Nishida's self-identity of absolute contradiction come in. So when you talk about pathless, we immediately think there's a path full. Human being cannot think of pathless without, or no path, path and no path. That is a human binary mode of thinking. When he says pathless is the self-identity of absolute contradictions. It is not no path or path, or pathless or path, but it is something above, which can be said both ways. Number one. Number two, he was speaking as the head of this particular organization, which has been advocating a particular path to achieve divine consciousness. And he was supposed to be a Maitreya, the reincarnation Buddha, or actually the vessel for the Buddha's message for the 20th and 21st century. And he has been severely trained since the age of 13 to the age of 34. So he had taken the path, and inside the Theosophical Society that has a teaching and dogma and path. So he wanted to make sure to emphasize pathless aspect of path. Number two. Number three, as each person is unique, whatever the path you take is created after you walk. You are a trailblazer because you are unique. So when you listen to me, whatever you take, or you may say, Yasuhiko is a complete bullshitter and everything he says is bullshit and forget about it. Or, oh, that's maybe interesting idea, maybe I can take it. But what you take from my sharing is different from what Daria takes from my sharing. And it is your path. And because people didn't understand Krishnamurti, they followed him for 40, 50 years. And when he is saying, don't follow me, I am not your guru, people made him into guru. So pathlessness became a path. That's a human binary mode of thinking. So I am not giving any instruction to anybody. If you come to my course, then I will say, try this out. Yes. But each person still try this out differently. So that's what Krishnamurti meant by pathless, which is the self-identity of absolute contradictions between path and no path. And your path is created after you walk, not before.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yasuhiko, and thank you, Sanket. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Jyoti. Brian.
Thank you so much for for being here and making the presentation. Both my wife and I really appreciate. I have a question about comparing the East and West. You mentioned that the West is the land or the focus on the wisdom of love and the love of wisdom, and the East is self-realization. So is there something beautiful or true in the Western tradition that you would like to emphasize or you think could be emphasized as separate and apart from this Eastern tradition?
Okay, in the Western philosophy, in the West, there has been a kind of a differentiation between philosophy and religion. And in the East, what is now called Eastern philosophy, in many ways, from the Western perspective, can be considered religion. Although vocabulary is different. So philosophy in the West moved more in the direction of knowledge, developing more and more knowledge. And even Plato's ideas, which you can say have a dimension of spirituality, and Western metaphysics is profoundly influenced by Plato, and Plato's ideas have been used by those who are in religion to formulate their own theology and so forth. But still, it was a pursuit of knowledge, and religion in the West has this dimension, which is similar to Eastern philosophy. That's number one. Number two, the language that Western cultures use for self-realization and self-transformation and achieving enlightenment is very different, because it comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition where God reigns supreme. So if I am talking to a Christian, I would say third stage of second stage will be like become at one with God. And third stage will be you become infused with divine wisdom, whatever. So there was that division or separation between philosophy and religion, and philosophy now separated into science as well in the West, and in the East it has been basically together. So that's maybe the fundamental difference I can see, and that's maybe the reason why the Eastern culture never developed science.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is going to be Jyoti, followed by Judith. Jyoti.
Yeah, firstly, great presentation. It does make sense to me. My question is that people who do meditation, their goal is to reach the goal, to core. They want to get in touch with themselves. They want to be true to themselves and they want to be true to life, to other people. However, doing all that, firstly, you feel like you are in peace because you're, but you feel you are by yourself because the other people are not in the same bandwagon as yourself. How do you protect yourself from the deceptions of the society? Because you have forgotten in your journey to attain your core how the trickery works in the world.
Okay.
How do you also live? Somebody already asked that question in two societies. One which is yours, which is honest and truthful. Others which other people are there and you are no control over them. How do you have any tools that you can get from meditation to protect yourself?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Two things. Number one, one of the conditioning that we have, all of us have, is that our life is kind of confined by time, sequential time. So every day you get up at a certain time, go to your work at a certain time. It's like a time. We make appointment. We had a 5 o'clock appointment today in New York and Washington, D.C. So meditation is actually taking a vacation from time. You see, goal orientation, time orientation, this is a part of our conditioning, our life. So you want to consider time to meditate is a time for taking a vacation from time. So you may have goals to achieve enlightenment, whatever. But if you consider meditation more in that way, you have a better time meditating. It is a vacation from time. Okay, so just I want to share that with you. And secondly, technique. So we have two layers. One is this program, meta program, operating system, believing. And on top of this, we have beliefs. So we believe that there's God. We believe that Christ came into this world to atone our sins. That's an old model. We believe that life is suffering, as Buddha taught. We believe that life, the speed of light is constant. All those things. We have enormous number of beliefs and assumptions. Actually, beliefs or assumptions assumed to be true. So in my program, when I used to do a program, I asked people to list the assumptions that they hold to be true. So you begin to identify some assumptions and then ask questions. Is it really true? Now, so long as we are living in this meta program of believing and with set of beliefs, we don't ask this question. So in order for you to ask this question, you need to be outside of it and then begin to ask the question. Is this belief I have really so? And some you say, yes, it is true. Some say maybe not. So you begin to have the distance from your beliefs, and you begin to have a new kind of mindset, which is not believing, but questioning. And when you go through this, every day, you can actually do this practice aside from meditation. Probably you want to take notes and what belief I have. And then ask yourself, is that true? And usually it takes at least 1 year for people to go through all of their assumptions. My course became 3 years because it took 3 years for everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Judith, followed by Daria. Judith.
I have two questions. So I'm thinking about what you said, our fundamental purpose is to self-realize. And I'm wondering why that is so, like why? Is it because of our human heritage, very specific to humanity? Because we question and other living things don't have the same capacity to question. And so we need to undo, like evolutionary, we evolved to have societies and communities. So we evolved to need to create these selves to get along with each other, possibly, I don't know. So I'm just wondering, because it's, we are biochemical, bioelectrical, neurophysiological, just like many other living things. So where and at what point and why did this become our fundamental purpose? That's my first question. And my second question is, in the second stage, I can sense of purpose. Now I'm not talking about purpose to self-actualize, but like the daily purpose that ourselves have in the different roles we play for our small s, parents, where we work, what we do, like how we contribute to society or not. In the second stage, when people achieve that, do they, what is that like? Are they just simply aware that they are wearing these different selves at different times, or are they behaving in a way that transcends those selves in a very authentic and consistent way? Like, where's the line on that?
Okay. Fundamental purpose of existence is to be. And to be or being always takes place as becoming. So being isn't becoming and becoming is being. And that's the fundamental purpose of existence, which is fulfilled at every moment of our existence, and everything is existence. So purpose is ongoingly fulfilled. And that being shows up, unfolding, becoming. In the case of humans, that takes the kind of a flavor of realizing more and more of you, more and more of your being. The more you become, the more you are. And so the purpose of human life is self-realization. It is a one way of stating the original statement that purpose of existence is to be, and to be is to become. And humans with this developed consciousness and complex thought, complex systems, we can frame it so that we can say the purpose of my life is to realize myself. But it is more of a declaration than assertion. You make it your purpose. But that declaration has a fundamental understanding. So the founding fathers, when they declared independence, it was not independent, but there is a profound understanding of life and society and the actual universe, out of which they made that declaration as an organic unfoldment of their fundamental understanding. So in that sense, the purpose of human life is self-realization, is a declaration coming from the fundamental understanding that purpose of life, purpose of existence is to be. Your second question, once you achieve the second stage of self-realization, the challenge becomes what Lao Tzu describes, or what I translate as Lao Tzu describes, is staying in the fulcrum of non-action. So you are centered in the fulcrum. There's a seesaws, and then there's a point of fulcrum. So your life is this whole seesaw moving around, but your consciousness and your being is centered in that non-action. That's the meaning of non-action in the Tao Te Ching. It is not that there's no action or movement, but that you are centered in the point of non-action, so that your action is balanced. And when you meditate, you go into that state and point. And if you can extend being in that state throughout the day, you can live your life more calmly. And one thing I recognize that you become better driver. Your response is so much faster than normal. My wife can tell you, we saved ourselves from a sure accident twice because my response was faster.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Daria, followed by Mike.
I have a question about the Western ideas, like with the wisdom. So I don't know if you've heard lately what's been coming out. They're finding mass graves of indigenous children. The invaders who came here put all, you know that story. So these are people that call themselves settlers and stuff. But now the knowledge is coming out, this is an invasion, there's been all this genocide and stuff. So what relevance does the continent of North America have to come to terms with the fact of what has happened here? And how does that influence self-realization, self-actualization? And those people who are ancestors or relatives of those people, what ownership or requirement do they have to look at their own history in the real lens of that history and start really understanding how to shed themselves? Because that has been, and this is a global issue, it's happened in India, it happened in Africa, like continents and countries and stuff. So how is that an important piece for both people who live in this continent and also that group of people who told themselves this story, the Smiths, the Jones, the Francois, that said they were these explorers? Can you comment on that?
Okay, we can approach this from two perspectives.
Yeah.
Those of you who are studying Tao Te Ching with me, chapter 2 of Tao Te Ching talks about duality. When we recognize beauty, there's ugliness. When we recognize good, there's evil. And this universe, on any level of reality, is binary. So since the beginning of the universe, there have been yin and yang, positive, negative. It has been the dialectic of yin and yang, negative, positive movement throughout the whole history of the universe. And there have never been a time when there are no violence amongst people. So some Spanish and others who came here, they went against indigenous people. But then indigenous people are actually sacrificing people at the altar 2 times a day. Incas and Aztecs civilization, they were actually sacrificing different people from different tribe 2 times a day, morning and evening. They killed so many people. So that's also violence. And then when look at the Old Testament, enormous amount of violence that took place. It's almost like God is like a mafia, killing so many people ongoingly. So violence has been with us since the beginning. Secondly, evil has been with us since the beginning, just like good. So today, there are evil forces and good forces. There are good people and bad people. At the same time, nobody is 100% good and nobody is 100% bad. When you look within, most of the humanity is within yourself. And what is called shadows, when we do real deep digging into our own psychology, we reach collective unconscious, in which there are murderers and dictators and all of those. There's a shadow of those negativities within ourselves. So when we, by the way, taking the path of self-realization requires self-responsibility. It is your responsibility to pursue this path. When you take responsibility for yourself, what happens is that you will take responsibility to all of it, good and bad. So in one sense, you are responsible for everything that happened to the entire humanity up to this moment. You are the Spanish who murdered indigenous people, or actually killed them on the war. You are an Aztec king who killed the different tribes twice a day. You are Hitler who killed 6 million Jews and so forth. Those are all part of us. So in one sense, we are all responsible. On the other hand, what we have done, our ancestors have done in the past, is not our responsibility. You can say the same, but I will take responsibility for my own actions in this life, being informed by what others have done in the past, and see how much we can eliminate the violence, unnecessary violence from this world, and how we can make this world better. So that's maybe my response to you. Yeah, big subject. We can talk about this all day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Mike. Mike, what's your question?
My question concerns how your philosophy fits in with Krishnamurti's philosophy. In the turn of the last century, which is not that long ago, he made a tour of the United States and gave a series of lectures about his book, The Network of Thought. And he gave a kind of a discussion about, rather than individual self-realization, a Jungian collective consciousness, collective unconsciousness, and how we're all connected, and also how mimetics fits into all that, even though he didn't use any of those terms. I sense you're talking about more in the area of individual self-realization rather than collective self-realization. Can you expand on how Krishnamurti fits into that? I know you had a previous question along those lines.
So there is no such thing as collective self-realization. Self-realization is always, always individual. That individual can contain the whole of the universe. So it is an individual matter. Collective doesn't have self. Collective is the collective of many selves, each one of whom is responsible for his or her own self-realization. And collective self-realization, collective transformation is a result of individual transformation and interaction between transformed beings. That can happen or that cannot happen. So that's number one. I completely deny this notion of collective self-realization. Secondly, Krishnamurti, I think he died in 1983. And toward the end of his life, actually, he had ongoing dialogue with people like David Bohm and many others, leading thinkers and cultural influencers. And so he got involved in a dialogue relative to collective transformation of society. But his teaching, or if there's any teaching, does not necessarily, does not directly address that issue. He was only talking about when we are going to deal with collective transformation, who we need to be. Who we need to be able to be engaged in the movement of collective transformation. Again, it is us, each one of us. So I am not quite familiar with what he did toward the end of his life, but based on what you said and based on what I know about Krishnamurti, that is my response. And you see, oneness is not a collectivism. That is extremely important to make distinction. And this new age spirituality, they make total confusion. So oneness is already there. We need to discover yourself is one as a unique, singular being, and you are one with the whole already. And this oneness has an impact on your part, and on your part has an impact on the whole. But it takes place within the consciousness that is you, which can expand beyond this particular individual. Is a cosmic individuality. But the oneness they talk about is collective. And you basically merge your small self into the collective, which means you become the member of the collective and you move along with whatever the member is dictating. It has zero self-responsibility. It is the opposite of a self-responsibility. And I have seen this since 1970s. And since I came to this country, it has become more and more prevalent. Collectivism is anti-spiritual development. And people who use collectivism to entice people who are into spiritual development, they are doing tremendous disservice. So I am against this notion of collective self-realization and against the notion of collectivism. It is a sovereign individuals awakening and working together to create sovereign integral. That is the collective transformation.
Thank you. That was very profound. It took me a while to digest it, but I appreciate your going into that subject.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Julie. Oh, Julie is not here, but I think the question is still a very good question. The question is, where does authentic purpose fit into this?
What?
Authentic purpose fit into this, in the sense that we all have gifts and strengths that in the ideal, supportive, early environment, children will naturally gravitate towards and naturally realize.
Yes. So what Lao Tzu talk about nature. Tao can be translated as nature. When nature is applied to humans, maybe authentic is the best terminology. Organic, authentic. So when we are born into this world and we acquire mimetic desire, because being a social beings, something like status, reputation or recognition from others are important for our own survival. So desire for status, good recognition or reputation is a mimetic desire. And authentic desire that we are born with does not seek status. Status is translated from the authentic desire. And we don't need to deny our mimetic desire. We need to see it is a mimetic desire. And what is the authentic desire within, underneath this? And authentic desire underneath this is always a desire for increasing self-realization. And once we begin to see this authentic desire and authentic purpose, which is to realize ourselves more and more, then looking at the society and where you find yourself, you want to have a kind of a strategy to live your life the best you can so that your authentic purpose is fulfilled. Sometimes you may have to move out of the place and change your profession, change your relationship. And you find a way to realize yourself amongst people at best you can.
Wonderful. Thank you. Last two questions are from Elena and Jyoti. Folks, keep your questions short so we can answer both of them. Elena, go ahead.
Sure. My question is to Yasuhiko. Have you experienced, and what's just a practical question, have you experienced a time as a dimension, right? Like if you go into the second and third stage, that the time is entirely different. And have you experienced that? And how would you, I know the time slows down. So have you had those periods of time slowing down? And what's just generally if you had this experience? That's my question. Thank you.
When you have the second stage realization, you become at one with the eternal, the timeless. And thereby you realize that time and space within which existence exists is a cosmic scheme. And every moment of our now is not the moment of now, but momentum of eternity, moving into future and then past. And so you become free from time because you find your being outside of time. So again, it is a point of fulcrum I mentioned. that point of fulcrum is timeless and spaceless, or the point is in the space, but you know what I mean. So it is when you begin to stay there, you become more a master of time than a slave to time. So your relationship to time change. Once you have the second stage, enlightenment, and you have the experience of timelessness, or you're being timeless. So in that sense, you never die. And of course, you as this finite uniqueness has bi-terminal, beginning and end. And then you realize, okay, sooner or later, this being is going to disappear. See what I can do within this time frame. So you use time, more productively.
Wonderful. Let's go to Ambika, followed by Jyoti. Ambika. Ambika, you need to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So you may have already answered this, Yasuhiko, with so many questions that have been addressed. Growing up in India, you always get thrown with this idea of karma. Everything you do is karma. And I sense though at times this becomes not just a distraction, but not exactly an accurate understanding of our actions and words, because it seems to be always a trap. And then when I've had these discussions with people, what I get is everything you do is karma. Everything that is done to you is karma. And then I think you never step out of it. And there has to be a way to step out of it without being caught in this jal, this web of time, of karma. So in that sense, the other answer we get is, oh, if it's your karma, you'll achieve this. If it's not, which seems to me such a derogatory way of living a life. So I would like some light on this idea of being caught in karma, because I don't think everything we do necessarily is caught in that.
So karma is what happens when you are unconscious.
Okay.
Karma is what happens to you and as you when you are not aware of who you are. And it is seen as a series of action, reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction. And as a result, it starts to accumulate. But once you become present to who you are in the second stage, large S self, the moment that of awareness, well, historical fact remains, but it ceases to affect you at all. So everything you have done in the past, so long as you are unaware, action, reaction will happen. So eventually, you become a victim of whatever the reaction, whatever the action you have done as a reaction. But once you are aware of it, you go outside of this action reaction. So you free yourself from karma in an instant. Of course, physically, you have overeaten for 50 years. Well, just because you become enlightened does not mean that you lose weight in an instant. So in the physical dimension, it takes time, but you are no longer affected by, you lose weight and get to your normal healthy weight in time.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, last question is from Jyoti. Jyoti.
Yeah, your presentation is very soothing to the soul. And so is the process of self-realization. My question is, and I'm going to end here, how does it protect us from the maladies of life? If we are doing such a hard work and we are getting in touch with our Atma and we are going, we are tracking a right path, can this defend you or protect you and make you immune to the maladies of life, like illnesses and other, diseases that poor people get?
Okay. Look, you may be the most enlightened human being, and you are invited by somebody in India to give a lecture. And you go into the plane and plane crashes. Okay, so in that sense, we never know. Number one. So you have fulfilled your purpose in self-realization to the degree to which you could, and that memory, or not memory, that experience will be encoded into the collective consciousness, which have an impact on the evolution of not the one I talked about, but the, evolution of consciousness. But when you are aware, many things happens which is beneficial. When you are aware of the whole, you sense the danger more than others, and naturally you avoid danger which other people may encounter. So the awareness includes the biochemical, bioelectrical, and aura, yeah, and then so all of it, and so you're physically, energetically, you become more sensitive, and then physical danger, as well as a metaphysical, invisible danger, because you with the movement of the whole, you become more aware. So as a result, you will avoid a dangerous situation. Since you have already avoided, there's no way for you to know that you have avoided, but it happens. And also many of the diseases, physical diseases, chronic ones, come because people are stressed, fragmented, and unconscious. So you will stop overeating, and you will start eating food that is more in harmonious with you, in the way, and also you will start eat in a way it is most harmonious with you. Now, on the basic level, you become more harmonized. And as a result, health means to be whole. So naturally, you become healthier. Yes?
Yeah.
And at the same time, just because you have achieved the higher state of consciousness, you're not 24 hours conscious. And sometimes life takes you, and then there are a moment of forgetfulness, and something can happen to you. So I'm not, nobody's perfect, but overall, that is the fundamental, direction that we will move to.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Yasuhiko. This was fantastic and great questions, folks. And I look forward to our next conversation about a month from today. Thank you. Bye.